Nobody in the room expected the exchange to escalate the way it did. The atmosphere was already tense. Cameras were recording. Reporters leaned forward in anticipation. Staff members whispered quietly among themselves. It was a hearing focused on accountability, policy decisions, and public trust. Emotions were high, and both sides understood that millions would eventually watch the footage online. In the middle of that charged setting, JD Vance made a remark that immediately shifted the tone of the room. Leaning back in his chair, offering a tight smile, and looking directly at Jasmine Crockett, he suggested, maybe we should take an IQ test. For a brief moment, there was silence, the kind of silence that feels heavier than raised voices. A few people laughed nervously, others froze. Some staffers lowered their eyes to their notes as if pretending not to hear the comment. But Jasmine Crockett heard it clearly. Meme lacht thing. What appeared at first to be a joke quickly revealed itself to be something more pointed. In political settings, such remarks are rarely accidental. They can be designed to provoke, to redirect attention, or to shift the focus away from policy and toward personal confrontation. The hearing had already been intense, with discussions centered on accountability and public records. The IQ comment introduced a new dynamic. JD Vance appeared confident in that moment. The remark seemed intended to capture attention, perhaps even to generate a viral clip. However, what followed was not the reaction many in the room may have anticipated. Jasmine Crockett did not raise her voice. She did not interrupt. She did not display visible frustration. Instead, she smiled calmly. It was not an angry expression, nor a forced one. It was composed and measured. The energy in the room shifted. What might have been perceived as humorous moments earlier no longer felt that way. Crockett adjusted her microphone slightly, took a steady breath, and allowed the silence to linger. The pause extended for several seconds, long enough for cameras to tighten their focus and for observers to sense that something deliberate was unfolding. Then she responded, calmly asking, "You want to measure intelligence." Her tone was not defensive. It was not sarcastic. It sounded genuinely inquisitive. That tone changed the dynamic of the exchange. Rather than appearing to be the subject of scrutiny, she reframed the moment so that the challenge itself became the focus. JD Vance followed up with broader remarks referencing standards, performance, and competence. The comments were general in nature. At that point, Jasmine Crockett redirected the discussion. She suggested that if standards were the topic, then they should examine them directly. From there, the conversation shifted away from the concept of an IQ test and toward documented records. She began citing specific votes, public statements, and instances where previous positions appeared to conflict with later ones. She delivered each example steadily, without raising her voice. She did not rush through her points. Instead, she presented dates, context, and documented details. When JD Vance attempted to interject, she continued speaking calmly. The moderator allowed her to proceed. The tone of the room changed again. Reporters typed rapidly. Staff members exchanged glances. The earlier remark about an IQ test no longer seemed humorous. It appeared increasingly risky in contrast to the detailed policy discussion unfolding in response. After outlining several examples, Jasmine Crockett paused. Looking directly at JD Vance, she stated calmly that if intelligence is about consistency, accountability, and understanding consequences, then she would be willing to compare records rather than IQ scores. That statement marked a turning point in the exchange. The focus had shifted from a personal metric to public documentation. The conversation was no longer about an abstract test of intelligence. It was about legislative history and measurable actions. The power dynamic in the room appeared to change. JD Vance leaned forward again, this time speaking with a sharper tone. He attempted to reframe her response as avoiding the original suggestion. However, the contrast between his increased intensity and her steady composure became noticeable. The moderator shifted slightly, and the room remained attentive. When he finished speaking, Jasmine Crockett leaned toward her microphone once more. In a calm and direct voice, she stated that he did not have the authority to question her intelligence while ignoring the documented facts she had just presented. The cameras captured the exchange closely. She continued by suggesting that intelligence should be defined properly. She asked whether it involved memorizing talking points, using insults when policy arguments falter, or understanding how decisions affect real people. Each question was delivered evenly, without visible anger. The framing remained focused on conduct and policy rather than personal retaliation. JD Vance shifted in his seat. At one point, he attempted to interrupt, but Crockett briefly raised her hand to indicate she had not finished. The moderator allowed her to continue. She referenced the timing of the exchange, noting that just seconds earlier, the remark had been made as a clever comment. Instead, she argued, it revealed something more significant about how disagreements were handled under pressure. She stated that when confronted with documented inconsistencies, resorting to personal attacks diverts from substantive debate. Again, her tone remained steady. She emphasized that intelligence is not measured by a number, but by the ability to defend one's record without attacking another person's character. JD Vance attempted to respond by suggesting that the exchange was political theater. Crockett answered that if it was theater, the opening line had already been written. The exchange remained controlled, yet pointed. He later referenced academic credentials and elite institutions. She acknowledged that degrees hold value, but added that they do not automatically translate into wisdom, nor do they excuse hypocrisy. At that stage, the discussion had fully transitioned from a personal remark to a broader debate about accountability and leadership standards. When JD Vance pivoted toward other policy areas, including economic matters and border security, the shift felt abrupt. The earlier exchange still lingered. Crockett then posed a direct question, asking for an explanation regarding a change in position between one year and the next, without attributing blame elsewhere. The question centered on accountability rather than intelligence. JD Vance offered a partial explanation, referencing evolving perspectives and constituent input. She responded by acknowledging the change, subtly reframing his answer as confirmation of her earlier point. As the hearing neared its conclusion, the moderator indicated that time was limited. Before moving on, Jasmine Crockett delivered one final statement. She said she did not need an IQ test, she needed transparency. The comment settled into the room without theatrics, but its impact was clear. By the time the session ended, the atmosphere had permanently shifted. What began as a brief personal challenge had transformed into a widely observed exchange about standards, leadership, and public records. Within minutes, clips of the moment began circulating beyond the chamber. As the hearing concluded, the tension did not dissipate. Instead, it followed everyone out of the chamber. Staff members exited quickly, reporters moved with urgency, phones were already in hand. Clips were being trimmed and uploaded before many had even reached the hallway. The exchange that lasted just 31 seconds had begun to take on a life of its own. Outside the room, conversations centered on one moment. The suggestion of an IQ test was already circulating online. Initial posts highlighted the remark itself, often framed dramatically, but within minutes the focus began to shift. Jasmine Crockett's response, delivered calmly and anchored in documented records, was spreading alongside the original comment. Social media platforms filled rapidly with side-by-side clips. On one side, JD Vance leaning back and offering the challenge. On the other, Crockett's steady response reframing intelligence as consistency and accountability. The contrast was clear and easily digestible. That contrast drew attention. News organizations picked up the footage. Cable networks replayed the exchange repeatedly. Commentators discussed whether the moment represented political theater or a strategic miscalculation. Nearly every replay emphasized the same turning point, the reframing of intelligence away from a personal metric and toward public record. Inside JD Vance's office, advisors began reviewing the coverage. The original remark had been delivered in a setting where cameras were rolling and attention was already heightened. The expectation may have been that the comment would dominate headlines on its own terms. Instead, it was being dissected in detail. The central question emerging across platforms was not about IQ scores, but about judgment. One reported reaction from an advisor reflected that concern, asking why the exchange had turned personal. The risk in such moments is clear. If the person targeted responds emotionally, the narrative often centers on that reaction. If they remain composed and redirect the discussion, the narrative can shift in unexpected ways. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett did not immediately address the media. She did not hold a press conference. She did not offer additional commentary beyond what had already been said in the hearing. She exited calmly. That absence of added reaction amplified the existing footage. Without new statements, attention remained focused on the original exchange. By evening, major outlets were running segments dedicated to the moment. Panels replayed the clip repeatedly. Some framed it as an example of escalating rhetoric in political debate. Others described it as a demonstration of composure under pressure. Regardless of framing, the same lines continued to circulate widely. JD Vance eventually spoke briefly to reporters. He suggested that the remark had been sarcastic and that reactions were overstated. He indicated that the exchange was being taken out of context. However, the full recording was already widely available. Viewers could watch the comment and the response in their entirety. In the digital environment, once a clip spreads, it often remains intact. Editing and reframing become difficult when full footage is accessible to millions within minutes. The moment became a trending topic. The phrase linking intelligence with consistency and accountability appeared repeatedly across posts, headlines, and commentary segments. The next morning's headlines reflected the impact. Some described the exchange in neutral terms, others emphasized that the personal remark had overshadowed policy discussion. That framing mattered. The original hearing had focused on substantive issues, yet public attention centered largely on the brief exchange. Jasmine Crockett appeared on a morning program the following day. When asked about the moment, she declined to escalate the situation. She stated that her focus remained on the work. The response was concise and measured. She did not revisit the remark directly, nor did she expand the confrontation beyond what had already occurred. That restraint reinforced the existing narrative. The absence of emotional follow-up allowed the original footage to stand on its own. Viewers were left to interpret the exchange without additional commentary from her side. Across media platforms, analysts began reviewing prior public appearances from both individuals. Some looked at previous debates and hearings to determine whether the moment represented a broader pattern or a singular incident. Discussions expanded to include themes of leadership style, tone under pressure, and the risks of personal remarks in formal settings. Communication experts weighed in. Leadership consultants discussed how reframing a personal challenge into a standards-based discussion can alter the dynamics of public debate. They noted that rejecting the premise of an insult and elevating the criteria of discussion often shifts momentum. The phrase elevating the criteria appeared in commentary as observers described how the exchange evolved. What began as a suggestion of an IQ comparison had transformed into a discussion of voting records, policy shifts, and accountability. The debate moved from personal measurement to documented action. By the third day, reactions extended beyond traditional political commentators. Professors, debate coaches, and organizational leaders analyzed the exchange as a case study in composure. The focus broadened beyond party lines. Some supporters of JD Vance acknowledged that the remark may have been unnecessary, even if not catastrophic. That distinction became part of the discussion. Behind the scenes, both teams monitored public response. Engagement metrics increased, clips continued circulating. While there were no immediate dramatic shifts in polling reported publicly, analysts observed subtle movement. Even small changes in approval ratings drew attention in a competitive political environment. Younger voters engaged in the conversation in notable ways. Many discussions did not center on intelligence in academic terms. Instead, they focused on emotional control, communication strategy, and leadership tone. The concept of intelligence expanded beyond a numerical test and into broader evaluations of conduct. Throughout the week, the original 31 seconds continued to surface in new contexts. Each replay highlighted small details: the pause before Crockett responded, the shift in JD Vance's posture, the tightening of expressions, the timing of a final line about transparency. Body language analysis videos gained traction. Micro expressions were examined frame by frame. As the clip circulated, the narrative evolved. It was no longer simply about a single remark. It became a reference point in broader conversations about debate standards and public accountability. For JD Vance, the exchange underscored the long reach of a brief statement made on camera. For Jasmine Crockett, it reinforced an image of controlled response under scrutiny. Yet the immediate media cycle eventually began to move forward. New headlines emerged. Other stories captured attention. The IQ remark faded from daily front page prominence, but it did not disappear entirely. Instead, it settled into public memory as a defining exchange. Within political strategy meetings, discussions reportedly emphasized message discipline. Advisors encouraged a return to policy focused debate and caution regarding personal jabs. The lesson was practical. In high visibility settings, every remark can become amplified. As the week progressed, both JD Vance and Jasmine Crockett returned to legislative responsibilities. Public appearances resumed. Scheduled hearings continued, yet the awareness of heightened scrutiny remained. Cameras lingered slightly longer. Reporters listened more closely. A week later, both would find themselves in the same chamber once again. The setting was familiar. The cameras were in place. However, the tone entering the room felt different. The previous exchange had altered expectations.